It all started with a phone number. Isn't that how it always goes? Some small and detail you overlook in the grand, exciting scheme of things. For me, the grand scheme was finally buying my own business. A small video production house, a bit dusty and forgotten, but it was mine. I poured every last cent of my savings and a terrifyingly large chunk of a bank's money into this dream. The equipment was decent, the studio space was workable, and the client list, while small, was a start. The seller was a fast-talking guy who gave me a rock-bottom price, claiming he was moving on to a bigger, better venture out of it. His name was Steve. The first week was a whirlwind of paint fumes, cable management, and endless calls to the utility companies. The phone, a clunky old multi-line system, sat on the corner of my new desk like a toad. I barely paid it any mind until it rang on a Tuesday morning. "Is Steve there?" The voice on the other end was gruff, impatient.
No, sorry. He sold the business. This is the new owner." "Sold it?" A dry, humorless laugh crackled through the receiver. "Of course he did. You tell that son of a bitch that Mike from A1 Roofing is going to be paying him a visit. He knows what for." Click. I stared at the phone. Well, that was aggressive. I shrugged it off. Probably a disgruntled supplier. Every business has them. I made a mental note to check the accounts payable records Steve had left behind, which, in retrospect, were suspiciously thin. The next day, another call. A woman this time, her voice tight with frustration. "I need to speak to Steve. Now." "He's not here," I said, my spiel already prepared. "He no longer owns this company." "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she groaned. "This is Maria from Elegant Events. He owes me $5,000 for a wedding catering job. He's been dodging my calls for 3 months. I need to speak to Steve. Now." "He's not here," I said, my spiel already prepared. "He no longer owns this company." "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she groaned. "This is Maria from Elegant Events. He owes me $5,000 for a wedding catering job. He's been dodging my calls for 3 months. I need to speak to Steve. Now." "He's not here," I said, my spiel already prepared. "He no longer owns this company."
Can you believe the nerve? Stiffing your own caterer? She took a breath. "Look, I'm sorry to unload on you, but if you see him or talk to him, can you please tell him Maria called? He needs to pay his bill." I promised I would, jotting her name and number down on a sticky note. Roofing. Maria, catering, 5K. An uneasy feeling started to creep into the back of my mind. The seller, Steve, had been charming, slick, maybe a little too eager to close the deal. He'd told me new venture was in tech, something about app development. He'd painted a picture of a man on the rise, leaving his small-time past behind. But the man Maria described sounded very different. That was 4 months ago. A call from a tuxedo rental shop. "We're missing 6 designer tuxes. Steve was supposed to return them the Monday after the ceremony. We're gonna have to file a police report for theft if we don't him." A DJ, a florist, a wedding photographer who, it turned out, had shot the entire event and had yet to see a dime for his work, and was refusing to hand over the photos. Each call was a new verse in the same sad song. Steve got married, hired a bunch of local vendors, and then vanished, leaving nothing but a disconnected cell phone and this office number as his only digital footprint. My desk started to disappear under a sea of sticky notes. Each one represented a person, a small business owner like me, who had been completely screwed over. I learned the intimate details of Steve's nuptials. I knew the floral arrangements were a mix of white lilies and baby's breath. I knew the dinner was a choice between filet mignon and pan-seared salmon.
I knew the first dance song was some cheesy pop ballad I never heard of. I felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome at the worst wedding in history. The callers weren't just names and numbers anymore. They were stories. Mike the roofer, it turned out, had fixed a leak at Steve's home. A wedding gift, Steve had called it, promising to pay him double for the rush job right after the honeymoon. Mike had 2 kids and a mortgage. The $5,000 from Maria's catering company was meant to cover payroll for her small staff. The limo driver had to pay for the gas and his drivers out of his own pocket. Corporations, these were people who had been conned by a man who smiled while he took their money. My frustration with the constantly ringing phone morphed into a slow-burning anger on their behalf. I was the inheritor of this mess. I could just change the number, I suppose. Get a new one, disconnect from the past. It would have been the easy thing to do.
The logical, business-savvy move. But every time the phone rang and I heard the desperation and fury in someone's voice, the thought of cutting them off felt wrong. It felt like I'd be erasing the last known evidence of Steve's crimes. So, I did the opposite. I bought a ledger book. I stopped using sticky notes and started a formal log. Date of call, caller's company, amount owed, and a section for notes. I became an unwilling receptionist for a con man's victims. Okay, Mike, I've got you down for the roofing job. Can you give me the exact amount and the date of service? Some calls were heartbreaking. One was from an elderly woman who ran a small custom invitation shop. She had handmade 200 intricate wedding invitations and had been paid with a check that bounced so hard it practically left a crater in her bank account. She was crying on the phone. It was my biggest order of the year, young man. I had to pay for all that card stock up front. I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month. That was the call that changed everything. That was the moment my passive anger turned into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about bad business. This was predatory. Steve hadn't just stiffed a few vendors. He'd planned a grift. He'd orchestrated his entire wedding as a massive, elaborate scam to steal from honest, hardworking people. And I, by pure chance, was sitting in the epicenter of the fallout, holding the one thing that connected all these disparate lives, his old phone number. I wasn't just going to take messages anymore. I was going to become a switchboard operator from hell. The first step was to gather more information. I started asking more pointed questions. Do you have an address for him? Everyone had the same one. A P.O. box at a mail services store. Useless. He'd clearly planned his escape route, but I kept digging. I started an Excel spreadsheet, columns for names, contact info, amounts owed, dates. The total was staggering. By my count, Steve had scammed his way into a nearly $75,000 wedding. My own business was struggling to get off the ground. I was eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week, trying to make my meager startup capital stretch. And here was this guy, Steve, who had financed a lavish party on the backs of people just like me, and was now probably living it up somewhere, laughing without a care in the world. The injustice of it all was a constant bit in my mouth. I had a sudden thought one afternoon while talking to the photographer. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin, I said. You never gave him the photos, right? Hell no, he replied. No pay, no pics. I have $1,000 end. Why? I have none now. He was handsome, in a generic salesman kind of way. Tanned skin, perfectly white teeth, expensive-looking haircut. He was smiling at the camera, a picture of confidence and success. He looked utterly punchable. I printed the photo and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. It was a declaration of war. My little production studio was now a command center for Operation Takedown. The problem remained how to find him. A P.O. box was a dead end. His cell was disconnected. He was a ghost. But ghosts leave trails. I started thinking about his new venture. He told me it was something in tech. It was a vague clue, but it was all I had. People like Steve, they don't usually lay low for long. They need an audience. They need to feel important. I started spending my evenings not on my own business plan, but on a different kind of project. I became a digital detective. I scoured LinkedIn, Facebook, business registries.
I searched for Steve, plus every possible keyword: tech, app development, startup, founder, CEO. It was a sea of faces, a needle in a digital haystack. Weeks turned into a month. The calls kept coming and my list kept growing. I had over 24 names now. A community had formed with me as its unwilling hub. They would call me for updates as if I were some private investigator they'd hired. Anything on Steve yet? Mike the roofer would ask every Friday. Not yet, Mike, but I'm still looking. How are things on your end? We were all in this together. A strange, angry little family brought together by a common enemy.
Grow your brand. The card screamed in bold, cheerful font. I was about to toss it in a recycling bin when something caught my eye. On the back, under a list of sponsoring companies, was a logo I didn't recognize. Innovate Horizons, LLC. It was a generic, meaningless name, the kind a guy like Steve would come up with. But it was the name underneath that made my heart hammer against my ribs. Keynote speaker, Stephen R. Last name, my Steve. Oh, you beautiful, arrogant idiot. I had him. He wasn't hiding in another state. He wasn't low. He was right here in the same city, preparing to get on a stage and present himself as a legitimate businessman. A thought leader. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. I immediately went to the conference website, and there he was. The same smiling, punchable face from the wedding photo, looking back at me from the speakers page. His bio was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense, full of buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift. He was the co-founder of Innovate Horizons, a new marketing and brand strategy firm. The website listed an address for their brand new, undoubtedly fancy office downtown. I felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made my hands shake. I stared at the address on the screen, then at the photo of Steve pinned to my corkboard, and then at the ledger book, now almost full, sitting on my desk. All the pieces were there. All the anger, all the frustration, all the stories of betrayal. It was all about to come together. I picked up the phone and started making calls of my own. But I wasn't taking messages anymore. I was delivering 110, Women's Vanna Environment Stereo Avenue the completion. I wanted something elegant. Something that would dismantle his new life with the precision of a surgeon. See, his power came from his image. The illusion of success and legitimacy. The key wasn't to just get the money back. It was to shatter that illusion in front of the very people he was trying to impress. His new partners. His new partners. His new clients. I spent the next 2 days on the phone, I spoke to every single person on my list. I explained the situation. I had found him. I had his new company name and, more importantly, his new address. I proposed a plan. Not a mob, not a shouting match, but a quiet, orderly, and utterly devastating procession. Here's what we're gonna do, I explained to Mike the roofer, who was practically vibrating with excitement through the phone line. The conference is in 2 weeks, but we're not waiting for that. We're gonna pay him a visit next Wednesday, at 10 to their a.m. sharp. What do we do? Just show up and demand our money? He asked. No, I said. You're gonna do what you've always done. You're gonna present him with an invoice. I told everyone the same thing. Don't be angry. Don't yell. Be professional. Print a fresh official copy of your unpaid invoice. Dress professionally, as if you're attending a business meeting. We would all arrive at the Innovate Horizons office at the same time. We would walk in one by one and calmly ask the receptionist to see Mr. Stephen, last name, to settle an outstanding account. The final touch was the information packet. I compiled my Excel spreadsheet into a neatly formatted document. It listed every creditor, their business, the service they provided for his wedding, the amount they were owed, and their contact information. At the top, in a large, bold font, I put the title, Account Till Payable. The Wedding of Stephen R. Last name. It looked official. It looked damning. I made 30 copies the night before. I bear my think of the bold woman who made the invitations, her voice cracking with despair. I thought of Maria, Mike, and Kevin. This wasn't just my fight, but I had become its willing general. Wednesday morning arrived, gray and overcast. I drove downtown, a cardboard box with 30 packets sitting on the passenger seat. The Innovate Horizons office was in one of those new glass and steel buildings that screamed expensive. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:55 a.m., they started. First, I saw Mike the roofer, a big, burly guy in a clean work polo, holding a single piece of paper. Then Maria from a catering company, looking sharp in a business suit. The limo driver, the florist, the tuxedo shop owner. One by one, a quiet army of the wronged assembled on the sidewalk. They didn't talk much. They just nodded at each other, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. A few of them looked over at my car and gave me a small... I felt a lump form in my throat. I hadn't realized how tired I was, how nice and how not playing. 2. I hadn't realized how tired I was, how amazed they were themselves. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:55 a.m., they started to arrive. First, I saw Mike the roofer, a big burly guy in a clean work polo, holding a single piece of paper. Then Maria from the catering company, looking sharp in a business suit. The limo driver, the florist, the tuxedo shop owner. One by one, a quiet army of the wronged assembled on the sidewalk. At precisely 10:00 a.m., I watched as Maria, taking the lead, opened the heavy glass door and walked inside. The others followed in a calm, orderly line, like they were going to church. A church of reckoning. I gave them a 5-minute head start. Then, I grabbed my box of packets and walked across the street. It was time to deliver the sermon.